It was a regular Tuesday morning when Karen called John into her office. He could sense something was wrong. The tension in the air was thick, and as soon as he sat down, Karen cut straight to the point. "John, we're going in a different direction. Your services are no longer needed," she said coldly, barely making eye contact. John was stunned. His heart raced as he tried to process what she had just said. After 40 years of service, he was being tossed aside like an old machine. "But I've been working on new patents," John stammered, his voice shaking. "I've developed something groundbreaking for the company." Karen wasn't interested. She had already made up her mind. "The company owns the patents, John," she snapped. "We don't need you anymore. You're dismissed." As John walked out of the office, his head spinning, little did Karen know that her cold decision was about to become the company's biggest mistake. The news of John's firing spread quickly through the company, but few seemed to care. To most of the younger employees, he was just the old guy in the corner, quietly doing his work. They didn't know him personally, didn't understand the value he had brought to the company over the years. But John's colleagues, the ones who had been there long enough to see his brilliance, were shocked. They knew that John wasn't just an ordinary worker. He was the brain behind some of the most important innovations in the company's history. John had never been one to boast, but his contributions were undeniable. He had developed dozens of patents that had brought Technovate millions in revenue. The problem was that he had always signed them over to the company without a second thought. He trusted the company, trusted that they valued him as much as he valued his work. But now, standing outside the building for the last time, John realized that trust had been a mistake. As he sat on the park bench near the office, his mind wandered to the projects he had been working on. He had spent the last few years developing a new technology that could revolutionize the industry. It was more advanced than anything Technovate had ever seen, and it was nearly complete. The thought of leaving it unfinished broke his heart. But then an idea struck him. He hadn't signed over the patent for his latest invention yet. Suddenly, a sense of hope filled him. The company may have fired him, but they didn't own his most valuable creation. That patent still belonged to him. And if Karen thought she could toss him aside without consequences, she was about to get the shock of her life. For the next few days, John stayed home, contemplating his next move. The company had been his life for so long that he didn't know what to do with himself. But now, with the realization that he still held the rights to the most important patent of his career, he felt a spark of purpose. It wasn't just about getting back at Karen or the company. It was about protecting the work he had poured his heart into. John decided to consult a lawyer. He wasn't well versed in the legal side of things, but he knew enough to understand that he had a chance. The lawyer, a sharp and experienced woman named Linda, confirmed what John had suspected. Technovate had no claim over the patent until he signed it over to them. And since John hadn't done that yet, he still had full control over the invention. Linda explained the situation in simple terms. "They fired you, but they didn't fire your ideas," she said with a smile. "You're holding all the cards now, John." It was a strange feeling for him, power. For so long, he had been at the mercy of the company, just another cog in the machine. But now, the tables had turned. With Linda's help, John began the process of patenting his invention under his own name. He didn't know exactly how this would play out, but one thing was clear. He wasn't going down without a fight. Karen, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. She had moved on from John, already focusing on the next phase of her plan to cut costs and boost profits. But her arrogance would soon come back to haunt her. As the weeks passed, John worked quietly but diligently on finalizing his invention. He made some adjustments, refined the design, and ensured everything was in perfect order. Meanwhile, Technovate continued on without him, oblivious to the storm that was brewing. It wasn't long before Karen began to notice that something was missing. The company had been relying on John's projects to fuel their next big product launch, but without him, things were starting to fall apart. The engineers who had taken over his work couldn't understand the complexity of the designs, and progress slowed to a crawl. Karen was furious. She had expected the transition to be smooth, but now, it seemed like the company was stuck. Her plan to push forward without John had backfired. In a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, she ordered the team to contact him for help. John wasn't surprised when he received the phone call from Technovate. He had been waiting for this moment. The company, once so eager to let him go, now needed his help. The voice on the other end of the line was one of the junior managers, trying to sound calm but clearly desperate. "John, we need your assistance with the new project. The engineers are having trouble understanding some of your designs, and we were hoping you could come back, at least for a few days," the manager said. John couldn't help but smile to himself. He had been discarded, but now they were coming back to him with their tails between their legs. It was ironic, but John wasn't bitter. He had already moved past the hurt of being fired. What mattered now was securing his future. Still, he decided to play it cool. "I'm sorry, but I'm no longer associated with the company," John replied firmly. "And as for the designs, those are now part of my personal project. I haven't signed over the patent." The manager's voice faltered. You haven't signed the patent?" he asked in disbelief. "No," John said, his voice calm but assertive. "That technology belongs to me now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. John could almost picture the panic spreading through the office as the news reached Karen. They had fired him, thinking they could continue without him. But now they were realizing just how big of a mistake that had been. Within hours, Karen herself called John. Her voice, which was usually so commanding and confident, was now laced with desperation. "John, we need to talk," she said, trying to maintain her composure. "There's been a misunderstanding. Let's work something out." John listened to her plead her case, but deep down, he knew that this was his moment. For the first time, he had the upper hand. He was no longer the old, disabled man they could push around. He was the one holding the key to the company's future. Karen wasn't used to being in this position. She had always been in control, always the one calling the shots. But now, she found herself at John's mercy, and it was a feeling she despised. Technovate was falling apart without his work, and the shareholders were starting to ask questions. The company needed his invention, and they needed it fast. But John wasn't in any rush to give it to them. After years of being overlooked and undervalued, he was finally in a position to negotiate. And he wasn't going to make it easy for them. Karen tried to sweeten the deal. She offered him a higher salary, a better position, even a partnership in the company. But John wasn't interested in returning to the company that had tossed him aside so easily. He had other plans now. "I appreciate the offer, Karen," John said politely, "but I've already filed the patent under my name. I'm not looking to sell it to Technovate. I have my own vision for how this technology will be used." Karen's frustration was palpable. She had never imagined that things would spiral out of control like this. Firing John had been a simple business decision, one that she thought would save the company money. But now, it was costing them everything. John, on the other hand, was calm. For the first time in years, he felt free. He no longer had to worry about the company's politics or the pressures of corporate life. He had his patent, his invention, and his future in his own hands. As Karen continued to push for a deal, John knew that the power dynamic had shifted. Technovate needed him more than he needed them, and that gave him all the leverage. He wasn't going to let them off easy. In the months that followed, John launched his own startup, using the technology he had developed at Technovate. With the help of investors who recognized the potential of his invention, John's company quickly gained traction in the market. His product, which was far more advanced than anything Technovate had to offer, was an instant success. Meanwhile, Technovate was struggling. Without John's expertise and his patent, they were unable to keep up with the competition. Their once promising product launch was a disaster, and the company's stock began to plummet. Karen, who had built her career on ruthless decisions and cutting costs, found herself on the receiving end of the very tactics she had used to climb to the top. As John's new company continued to grow, Technovate's board of directors realized they had made a huge mistake. They had fired the one person who could have saved them, and now they were paying the price. Karen was forced to step down as CEO, her reputation in tatters. It was a bitter end to her reign of power, but it was a fitting consequence for her arrogance. John, however, wasn't one to gloat. He had moved on from the company that had let him go. What mattered to him now was the future. He had built something new, something that was truly his own. And as he looked at the success of his startup, he knew that this was only the beginning. In the end, it wasn't the company or the title that defined John. It was his dedication, his passion, and his refusal to be pushed aside. Technovate had fired him, thinking they could replace him. But in doing so, they had underestimated the power of one man's vision. And as John's company soared to new heights, it became clear that the real mistake wasn't his, it was theirs. Years passed, and John's company became a leader in the tech industry. His groundbreaking invention changed the way the world worked, improving efficiency in ways no one had imagined. What started as a simple idea in the mind of a determined, disabled man had grown into a multi-billion-dollar business that left its mark on the world. John had come a long way from the days of working at Technovate, struggling to gain recognition for his hard work. He had faced challenges, both personal and professional, but he had never given up on his vision. The years of being undervalued and overlooked had only made him stronger. As his company flourished, John made sure to create an environment that was the opposite of what he had experienced at Technovate. His employees were valued, their contributions recognized, and their ideas nurtured. He knew firsthand how important it was to feel appreciated, and he made it his mission to ensure that no one in his company ever felt like they didn't matter. Technovate, on the other hand, continued its downward spiral. After Karen's departure, the company struggled to recover. Without John's patent, they had lost their competitive edge, and their once loyal clients had moved on to other, more innovative companies, many of which were using John's technology. Karen, once feared and respected, had faded into obscurity. Her ruthless tactics and cutthroat leadership style were no longer celebrated. In the end, her legacy wasn't one of success, but of a colossal failure, marked by the decision to fire the one person who could have saved the company. John, however, had no time to dwell on the past. He was too busy building the future. His invention was just the beginning, and with his newfound success, he was able to invest in new ideas, new technologies, and new opportunities. He became a mentor to young inventors, sharing his story and encouraging them to never let anyone stand in the way of their dreams. And as the years went on, John's name became synonymous with innovation and resilience. He had defied the odds, proving that age, disability, or being cast aside didn't define a person's worth. What mattered was the strength of one's vision and the determination to see it through. In the end, John's greatest success wasn't the money or the recognition. It was knowing that he had built something that would outlast him. His company, his invention, and his legacy would live on, inspiring future generations to dream big, work hard, and never give up, no matter what obstacles stood in their way. The man who had been fired by Technovate, the man who had been seen as disposable, had become a legend in his own right. And as his company continued to grow, one thing was clear: John had the last laugh, and his story was far from over.